A woman in a blood-stained wedding dress stumbles off a train in frozen Wyoming, but she's not looking for rescue. She's hunting the man who tried to destroy her. If you want to see how far vengeance can take a woman who refuses to die, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The train's brakes screamed against frozen metal, and Meilin Zhao felt the jolt run through her bones like a warning. She steadied herself against the wooden wall of the freight car, fingers numb inside torn gloves, and waited for the shuddering to stop. When it finally did, the silence that followed was worse than the noise. She'd been riding in the cold for 2 days, wedged between crates of mining equipment and sacks of grain that smelled like rot. No ticket, no seat, no right to be there at all. Just a body pressed into shadows, trying not to freeze or bleed out before the rails carried her far enough away from Boston to matter. The dress, what was left of it, clung to her like a second skin made of ice and humiliation. White silk, now gray and brown, ripped at the shoulder where Gideon Vale had grabbed her. Blood had dried in stiff patches across the bodice, some hers, some his. She'd fought. That much she remembered. The rest came in flashes, his breath against her neck, the crack of her head against the floor, the cold burn of snow when she finally broke free and ran. The freight door rattled open, and a blast of Wyoming wind hit her full in the face. Meilin didn't flinch. She'd learned not to. "Jesus Christ," someone muttered from the platform. She stepped down carefully, one foot and then the other, because her ribs screamed when she moved too fast. The platform was wood, old and splintered, dusted with snow that hadn't bothered to melt. A few men stood nearby, railroad workers in heavy coats, staring at her like she was a ghost. Maybe she was. "You all right, miss?" one of them asked, though his voice had that careful distance people used when they didn't actually want to get involved. "I'm fine," Meilin said. Her voice came out rough, underused. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Where is this?" "Black Hollow, end of the line." End of the line. She almost laughed, but her ribs wouldn't let her. "There a doctor here?" The man scratched his beard, looking uncomfortable. "Doc Peterson, yeah, but he doesn't take to strangers much. I'll manage." She walked past them before they could ask more questions, each step a small war against her body's insistence that she stop, sit down, give up. The town spread out before her like something out of a fever dream, a single dirt road flanked by wooden buildings that looked like they'd been thrown together in a hurry and left to rot. A general store, a saloon with foggy windows, a church with a crooked steeple, and beyond all of it, nothing but white. Snow and sky blurred together at the edges, erasing the horizon. She'd come here because the letter had promised something better. Wyatt Boone, rancher, widowed father, seeking honest partnership through marriage. No false promises. Respect and fair work in exchange for companionship. It had been formal, almost cold, but that coldness had felt like safety compared to the alternatives. Boston had become impossible after her father died and left her with nothing but debts, and a landlord who thought a Chinese woman alone was easy prey. The mail-order bride arrangement had seemed like a risk worth taking. Then Gideon Vale had stepped in. He'd intercepted the letters, she realized now, forged new ones, arranged a fake ceremony in a Boston courthouse with a man pretending to be a reverend, told her the train tickets were already paid for, that Wyatt had sent money for her travel, that everything was handled. She'd believed him because she'd wanted to, because the alternative was admitting she had nowhere else to go. The wedding night had revealed the truth. No tickets west, no rancher waiting, just Gideon in a locked room and hands that didn't stop when she said no. She'd gotten out, barely. A window, a fire escape, 3 stories down into snow that half broke her fall, then running, hiding in rail yards, trading the last of her jewelry for passage in a freight car, heading anywhere that wasn't Boston. And now she was here. End of the line. Meilin stopped in the middle of the road and looked around, trying to orient herself. The cold was already working its way through the dress, eating at what little warmth she had left. She needed shelter, food, information, in that order. A woman stepped out of the general store, took one look at Meilin, and froze. "Sweet mercy," she whispered. Meilin straightened her spine. "I'm looking for the Boone Ranch." The woman blinked. "Wyatt Boone?" "Yes." Are you the bride he sent for?" I was supposed to be. The woman's eyes traveled down the ruined dress, taking inventory of every tear and stain. Her expression shifted from shock to something harder to read. Pity, maybe. Or suspicion. You look like you've been through hell. I have. There was a long pause. Then the woman sighed and pulled her shawl tighter. Boone Ranch is 2 miles north. Follow the road till you see the split fence. You can't miss it. Thank you. You need help getting there? I can fetch. I'll walk. Meilin turned and started moving before the woman could argue. 2 miles. She could do 2 miles. She'd done worse. The road out of town narrowed into a path, then into wheel ruts barely visible under fresh snow. The wind picked up, biting at her exposed skin, and Meilin wrapped her arms around herself even though it hurt. Her feet were numb. She couldn't feel her toes anymore, which was probably for the best. She thought about Gideon as she walked. Not the violence, she'd already spent too much time on that, but the cold intelligence behind it. He hadn't acted on impulse. Everything had been planned. The forged letters, the fake ceremony, the isolation. He'd done this before. She was sure of it now. Men like that didn't just stumble into cruelty. They practiced. And he'd let her go. That was the part that kept circling back. After she'd kicked him hard enough to buy herself 3 seconds. After she'd thrown herself out the window and into the night. He hadn't chased her. Hadn't raised an alarm. Just let her disappear into the snow like she was already dead. Maybe he'd thought she would be. Maybe he'd counted on the cold or the fall or the simple mechanics of a woman alone with no money finishing what he'd started. He'd been wrong. The split fence appeared ahead, half buried in drifts. Beyond it, a ranch house sat low and sturdy against the white expanse, smoke rising from the chimney. Meilin stopped at the fence line and stared at it, trying to gather what was left of her strength. This was it, the place she'd been promised, the man who'd supposedly sent for her. Except he hadn't. Gideon had stolen that from both of them. She pushed through the fence and kept walking. The front door opened before she reached it. A man stepped out onto the porch, tall and lean, wearing a sheepskin coat and a look of complete confusion. He had dark hair going gray at the temples, a weathered face, and eyes that went sharp when they landed on her. "Who the hell are you?" he said. Meilin stopped at the base of the porch steps. Her legs were shaking. She locked her knees and forced herself to stay upright. "Meilin Zhao, I was told you were expecting me." "Expecting?" He stared at her, then at the dress, then back at her face. "Jesus, you're the woman from the letters." "Yes. I didn't send those." "I know." He came down the steps fast, hands out like he thought she might fall. She took a step back on instinct and he stopped. "Easy," he said. "I'm not going to hurt you." "I didn't think you were." "You look like you're about to drop." "I'm fine." "You're bleeding." Meilin glanced down. He was right. Blood had started seeping through the fabric again, a slow leak she hadn't noticed. She pressed her hand against the spot and felt the warmth of it, sticky and wrong. "I fell," she said. "Fell." Out a window. Wyatt Boone stared at her for a long moment, and she watched him piece it together, the dress, the blood, the fact that she'd walked 2 miles in the snow to reach a stranger's house because she had nowhere else to go. "Come inside," he said quietly. "I can work. I'm educated. I can read, write, do figures. I'm not asking for charity." "I didn't say you were, but you need to come inside before you freeze to death on my porch, and we can talk about the rest after." Meilin hesitated. Every instinct she had left screamed at her not to trust this, not to walk into another man's house and assume safety. But the alternative was the snow, and she'd already lost too much to it. She climbed the steps. The inside of the house was warm enough to hurt. Heat from the fireplace hit her skin like a slap, and she had to stop just inside the door to let her body adjust. The room was simple. Wooden floors, plain furniture, a table with mismatched chairs. Clean, but not fussy. Lived in. A girl appeared in the doorway to what looked like a kitchen, maybe 10 years old, with dark braids and her father's sharp eyes. She looked at Meilin and didn't scream, which was something. "Pa?" she said. "Grace, get some blankets. And water. Warm, not hot." The girl nodded and disappeared. Wyatt gestured toward a chair near the fire. "Sit." Meilin sat because her legs gave her no choice. The chair creaked under her and she realized how much she was shaking. What happened? Wyatt asked. A man in Boston, Gideon Vale. He intercepted your letters and wrote his own, forged a marriage arrangement, trapped me. And the dress? He liked the performance. Wyatt's jaw tightened. You get away on your own? Yes? Then what? I ran. Found a freight train heading west, got off here. You know he didn't actually marry you, right? Whatever he did, it wasn't legal. I know. Grace returned with blankets and a basin of water. She set them down carefully, eyes wide, then backed away to stand near her father. Wyatt knelt beside the chair and dipped a cloth into the water. I'm going to clean some of this. Tell me if I hurt you. Meilin nodded. He worked in silence, wiping dried blood from her hands, her neck. The gash along her temple she hadn't realized was still open. His hands were careful, steady. When he reached the torn shoulder of the dress, he paused. I need to see how bad this is. It's not deep. Let me see anyway. She let him pull the fabric aside. The wound was ugly, ragged, and bruising. But he was right. It wasn't deep. He cleaned it without comment, then wrapped it with strips of cloth Grace handed him. You need a real doctor, he said. Later. You need food. Later. He sat back on his heels and looked at her. What do you need right now? Meilin met his eyes. They were gray, she noticed. Calm, not soft, but not hard either, just steady. I need to know if you'll let me stay, she said, just until I figure out what comes next. You can stay as long as you need. I'll work. I won't be a burden. Didn't say you would be. I mean it. I'm not. Her voice cracked, and she stopped, hating the sound of it. Wyatt stood and moved back, giving her space. You don't have to prove anything tonight. Rest. Eat. We'll talk tomorrow. Grace stepped forward, hesitant. Do you want soup? Meilin looked at the girl, small, serious, holding a ladle like a weapon, and felt something crack open in her chest. Yes, she said. Thank you. The soup was thin but hot, and Meilin ate it slowly, forcing her stomach to accept what it had forgotten how to want. Wyatt and Grace moved around the kitchen, giving her room, not asking questions. When she finished, Grace took the bowl without a word and disappeared again. She's quiet, Meilin said. Her mother died 2 years ago. She's still working through it. I'm sorry. So am I. Wyatt pulled a chair over and sat across from her, elbows on his knees. The letters I got, the real ones, they came from a matchmaking service in Denver. I wrote back saying I wasn't interested, thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. No, somebody kept it going. Sent you my name, my address, made you think I was waiting. Gideon. You sure? He knew too much. Details about the ranch, about you. He didn't make it up. He stole it. Wyatt nodded slowly. You know anything else about him? Rich, connected. He owns a bank in Boston. People are afraid of him. People are afraid of rich men everywhere. Doesn't mean they're smart. He's smart, Meilin said. He planned this, every step. Then he made a mistake letting you go. She looked at him, surprised. You think you'd die out there? Wyatt asked. Probably. Then he doesn't know much about survival. Meilin almost smiled. Almost. Grace returned with more blankets and a pillow. You can sleep in the spare room. It's small, but it's warm. Thank you, Meilin said again. The girl nodded and led her down a narrow hallway to a door at the end. The room inside was barely big enough for a bed and a chest of drawers, but it had a window and a quilt that looked handmade. Grace set the pillow down carefully. Pa says you're staying a while. If that's all right. It's fine. We don't get many visitors. I'll try not to be trouble. Grace tilted her head, studying her. You don't look like trouble. You look tired. I am. Then sleep. Nobody's going to bother you here. The girl left, pulling the door halfway closed behind her. Meilin stood in the middle of the small room, still wearing the ruined dress, and felt the weight of the last week settle over her like a blanket made of lead. She should take the dress off. Wash. Sleep. Instead, she walked to the window and looked out at the snow. Somewhere out there, Gideon Vale was still alive, still free, still thinking he'd won. Meilin pressed her palm against the cold glass and made herself a promise. He hadn't. The next morning, she woke to the smell of coffee and the low murmur of voices. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then it all came back. The train, the walk, the blood. And she sat up too fast. Her ribs protested, but she ignored them. Someone had left clean clothes on the chest of drawers. A simple dress, wool, dark blue. Too big, but it would work. Meilin changed slowly, her body stiff and angry, and braided her hair back with shaking fingers. When she looked halfway human, she opened the door. Wyatt and Grace were at the kitchen table, eating in silence. They both looked up when she appeared. "Morning," Wyatt said. "Morning." "Coffee's on the stove. Help yourself." Meilin poured a cup and sat down at the far end of the table, leaving space between them. The coffee was strong and bitter, and she drank it anyway. "How do you feel?" Wyatt asked. "Better." "That's a lie, but all right." Grace pushed a plate toward her. "Eggs, bread, something that might have been bacon. You should eat." Meilin ate. It was easier than arguing. "We need to talk about what happens next," Wyatt said. "I'll find work. Pay you back for the food and the room." "I'm not worried about that." "I am." He set his cup down. "There's a school teacher job open in town. The last one left a month ago, and nobody stepped up. You said you're educated." "I am." "Then you could do it." Meilin looked at him, surprised. "They'd hire me?" "Town's desperate, and you'd be good at it." "You don't know that. I know you walked 2 miles in a torn dress and didn't die. That's more grit than most people have." She didn't know what to say to that, so she drank more coffee. "There's a town meeting tonight," Wyatt continued. "I'll take you. Introduce you. See if they'll listen. And if they don't, then we figure out something else." Meilin studied him across the table, this rancher who'd taken her in without question, who'd cleaned her wounds and offered her work like it was the simplest thing in the world. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Wyatt leaned back in his chair. "Because somebody should have helped you before it got this bad. And because I know what it's like to need a place to stand." Grace nodded, solemn. "Ma used to say that." "She did," Wyatt agreed. Meilin looked down at her plate. "I won't let you down. Didn't think you would." That night they rode into town in a wagon that rattled over frozen ground. Meilin wore the borrowed dress and a coat Grace had pulled from a trunk, and she kept her hands folded in her lap to stop them from shaking. The town looked different at dusk. Smaller, meaner, like it was closing in on itself against the cold. The meeting was held in the church, because that's where everything happened in Black Hollow. People filled the pews, bundled in coats and suspicion, and they all turned to stare when Meilin walked in. She felt their eyes like weights. Foreign. Outsider. Chinese. Woman. Wyatt put a hand on her back just for a second and guided her to a seat near the front. Grace sat beside her, small and fierce. The sheriff stood at the front of the room, a broad man with a tobacco-stained beard and a badge that looked like it had been through a war. He banged a gavel against the pulpit. "All right, settle down. We've got business." The room quieted. "Wyatt Boone's brought someone tonight. Says she's willing to take the teaching job." "Floor's yours, Wyatt." Wyatt stood. "This is Meilin Zhao. She's educated, experienced, and she needs the work. I'm vouching for her." A man in the back row stood up. "She ain't from here." "No," Wyatt said. "She's not. We don't know her. You don't know half the people in this room. Doesn't stop you from living next to them. It's different." "How?" The man hesitated, looking around for support. "She's Chinese," Wyatt finished. "Yeah. And she can read better than your kids. You got a problem with that, or you got a problem with her skin?" The room went silent. Meilin stood slowly. Every eye turned to her. "I don't need anyone's pity," she said, her voice carried, clear and sharp. "I need work. I can teach your children reading, writing, mathematics, history. I speak 3 languages. I won't waste your time or theirs. If you'd rather leave the school empty because you don't like where I'm from, that's your choice. But it's a stupid one." Someone in the middle pews laughed. Then someone else. The sheriff cleared his throat. "All in favor of hiring Miss Zhao, say aye." The ayes were slow, grudging, but they came. Enough of them. "Motion carries," the sheriff said. "School starts Monday." Meilin sat down, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack a rib. Grace reached over and squeezed her hand. "You did good," the girl whispered. "I got lucky." "No, you were brave." Outside, after the meeting, Wyatt helped her into the wagon. "That wasn't easy." "No. You handled it." "I didn't have a choice." He climbed up beside her and took the reins. "There's always a choice. You just made the hard one." They rode back in silence, the stars cold and distant overhead. Meilin thought about Gideon again, about the locked room, and the window, and the snow, about how close she'd come to disappearing. She hadn't. And now she had a job, a place, a chance. It wasn't much, but it was hers. When they reached the ranch, Grace was already asleep in the back of the wagon. Wyatt carried her inside and Meilin followed, her body aching but her mind sharp. "Thank you," she said at the door to her room. "For what?" "For not asking if I could do it, just assuming I would." Wyatt nodded. "Get some rest. Monday's going to come fast." Meilin closed the door and leaned against it, eyes shut. She could still feel the weight of the town's stare, the doubt and suspicion and barely concealed contempt. Let them doubt. She'd survived worse. Monday came like a slap. Meilin woke before dawn, dressed in the same borrowed wool dress, and braided her hair so tight her scalp ached. Grace was already in the kitchen, poking at oatmeal that had gone lumpy in the pot. "You're up early?" the girl said. "Couldn't sleep." "Nervous?" "No." Grace looked at her with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. "You're lying," Meilin almost smiled. "Yes." Wyatt appeared from the back room, already dressed for work, smelling like leather and cold air. He poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter, watching her. "You ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be." "They're going to test you, see if you break." "I know. Don't let them." Meilin met his eyes. "I won't." The schoolhouse sat at the edge of town, a one-room building with peeling paint and windows so dirty you could barely see through them. Inside, the air smelled like dust and old wood and something vaguely animal. Desks were scattered across the floor in no particular order, half of them missing legs. The chalkboard was cracked down the middle. Meilin stood in the doorway and felt her stomach drop. "It's not much," Wyatt said from behind her. "It's a disaster." "Yeah." She stepped inside, boots echoing on the warped floorboards. Someone had left books piled in the corner, their spines broken and pages loose. A dead mouse lay near the stove, stiff and gray. "The last teacher quit after a month," Wyatt said. "Before that, the job turned over 3 times in a year." "Why?" "Kids are rough, parents are worse, and the town doesn't pay much." Meilin picked up the dead mouse by its tail and tossed it out the window. "How much?" $8 a month. Plus you can live here if you want. There's a room in back." $8. It was nothing, barely enough to survive. But it was hers. "I'll take it," Wyatt nodded. "I'll help you clean up. Grace can bring some supplies from the house." They worked through the morning, sweeping out the dust and dead things, scrubbing the windows until light actually came through, dragging the broken desks outside and arranging the good ones in rows. Grace showed up with a bucket of nails, a hammer, and a rag that might have been a curtain once. By noon, the place looked almost livable. "Better," Wyatt said, surveying the room. "It'll do." He checked his watch. "Kids'll start showing up around 1. You want me to stay?" "No." "You sure?" "I need to do this alone." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Good luck." Meilin watched him and Grace leave, the wagon rattling down the frozen road, and then she was alone. She straightened the desks one more time, wrote her name on the chalkboard in clean, precise letters, and waited. The first child arrived at 1:30, a boy, maybe 7, with a dirty face and holes in his boots. He stopped in the doorway and stared at her. "You the new teacher?" he asked. "Yes." "You're a girl." "I'm a woman." "What's your name?" "Thomas." "Sit down, Thomas." He did, grudgingly, picking a desk in the back row. 2 more children followed, sisters, both blonde and thin, wearing matching coats that were too small for them. They whispered to each other and sat together in the middle. By 2 o'clock, she had 9 students. Ages ranged from 6 to 14. Some looked curious, most looked bored. One boy in the back, older, maybe 15, looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Meilin stood at the front of the room and waited for silence. It took a while. "My name is Miss Zhao," she said. "I'll be teaching you reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and geography. If you work hard, you'll learn. If you don't, you'll leave. Any questions?" A girl in the front raised her hand. "Can you even speak English?" "Better than you, apparently." "Next question." Someone snickered. The girl's face went red. The older boy in the back leaned back in his chair. "My pa says you ain't qualified." "Your pa is entitled to his opinion. Do you have an opinion, or are you just repeating his?" The boy's jaw tightened. "I got opinions." "Good. Write me 3 paragraphs about them. Due tomorrow." "I ain't writing nothing for you." Meilin walked down the aisle slowly, stopping in front of his desk. "Then leave. The door's behind you." He stared at her. She stared back. "I paid for this," he said. "Your parents paid. And if they want their money's worth, you'll do the work. If not, you're wasting my time and theirs." The room had gone completely silent. Every eye was on them. The boy stood up, shoving his chair back hard enough to make it screech. "This is bullshit. Language. I don't have to listen to you." "You're right. You don't. But you're still in my classroom, and until you leave, my rules apply." He grabbed his coat and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Meilin waited until the echo faded, then turned back to the class. "Anyone else want to test me, or can we get started?" No one moved. "Good. Open your readers to page 1. The rest of the day was a war of attrition. Half the students couldn't read past a 2nd grade level. 2 of them didn't know the alphabet. One girl fell asleep at her desk and didn't wake up until Meilin rang the bell to dismiss them. But they stayed. And they tried. And by the time the last child left, Meilin's head was pounding and her voice was raw, but she'd survived. She locked the schoolhouse door and walked back toward the ranch, her body aching in new and interesting ways. The sun was already setting, turning the snow orange and pink, and the cold bit at her face like punishment. When she reached the house, Wyatt was in the barn, working on something that involved a lot of hammering. She stopped in the doorway, waiting for him to notice her. He looked up, wiping sweat from his forehead. "How'd it go?" "I lost one." "The Harlan boy?" "You know him?" "Everyone knows him. He's been thrown out of 3 schools already." "Then I'm in good company." Wyatt set down the hammer. "The rest stay?" "Yes." "Then you did fine." Meilin leaned against the doorframe. "They're going to make this hard." "Probably." "I don't know if I can do it." "You can." "You don't know that." "Yeah, I do." He picked up the hammer again, turning it over in his hands. "You walked into a room full of people who didn't want you there and made them listen anyway. That's not luck. That's skill." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. "Dinner's in an hour," Wyatt added. "Grace is making stew." "I'll help." "You don't have to." "I want to." Inside, Grace was wrestling with a pot that was too big for her, muttering under her breath. Meilin took it from her gently and set it on the stove. "Stubborn thing," Grace said. "The pot or you?" The girl grinned. "Both." They worked side by side, chopping vegetables and stirring the stew, and Meilin felt some of the tension in her shoulders start to ease. This was simple, manageable, real. "How was school?" Grace asked. "Loud." "Did they listen?" "Eventually." "That's better than the last teacher. She cried on the first day." Meilin looked at her. "Really?" "Really. Jimmy Coulter put a frog in her desk, and she screamed so loud half the town heard it." "What happened to the frog?" "Pa made him take it home and keep it as a pet. He named it Hector." Meilin laughed before she could stop herself. It felt strange, like using a muscle she'd forgotten she had. Grace smiled. "You should do that more." "Do what?" "Laugh." "I'll work on it." Dinner was quiet but not uncomfortable. Wyatt talked about the fence he was fixing, Grace talked about a bird she'd seen that morning, and Meilin mostly listened. It felt normal, almost peaceful, and she hated how much she wanted to trust it. After they ate, She helped Grace wash the dishes, then retreated to her small room and sat on the bed, staring at the wall. Her body was exhausted, but her mind wouldn't stop. She thought about the classroom, the students, the boy who'd walked out. She thought about the way Wyatt had looked at her, steady, certain, like he believed she could do this even when she didn't. And she thought about Gideon. He was still out there, still free, still living his life like nothing had happened. Meilin pulled the pillowcase off her pillow and reached inside, feeling for the small bundle she'd hidden there. Letters. The ones Gideon had sent, forged in Wyatt's name. She'd kept them because they were proof, evidence, a thread she could follow if she ever got brave enough. She unfolded one and read it again, even though she'd memorized every word. The handwriting was too smooth, too practiced, nothing like the rough scrawl Wyatt used when he wrote notes for Grace. Gideon had been careful, but not careful enough. Meilin folded the letter and put it back. Not yet. She wasn't ready yet. But soon. The next week passed in a blur of chalk dust and exhaustion. The students tested her daily, lost homework, fake illnesses, deliberate disruptions, but Meilin held the line. She made them read aloud even when they stumbled. She made them solve problems on the board even when they complained. She didn't yell, didn't plead, didn't beg. She just waited them out. By Friday, something had shifted. Thomas, the boy with the dirty face, started showing up early to help her light the stove. The blonde sisters stopped whispering and started asking questions. Even the ones who clearly hated her stopped testing quite so hard. Progress. Small, fragile, but real. That afternoon, a woman appeared in the doorway as Meilin was erasing the chalkboard. She was middle-aged, well-dressed, with sharp eyes and a mouth that looked like it didn't smile often. "Miss Zhao?" Meilin turned. "Yes. I'm Margaret Coulter, Jimmy's mother." "The frog boy." Meilin nodded. "What can I do for you?" "I wanted to see the woman who's teaching my son." "Now you have." Margaret stepped inside, looking around the room with an expression that was hard to read. "It's cleaner than it was." "I don't like dirt." "Neither do I." She turned back to Meilin. "Jimmy says you're strict." "I am." "He also says you're fair." Meilin blinked. "He said that?" "Don't sound so surprised. Children notice when adults treat them like people instead of problems." Margaret paused. "I also heard you're living at the Boone Ranch." "Temporarily." "Wyatt's a good man." "I know. His wife was a friend of mine, Clara. She died too young." "I'm sorry." Margaret nodded. "He's been alone too long. Him and Grace both. It's good they have someone around again." Meilin didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. "Anyway," Margaret continued, "I wanted to tell you that if you need anything, supplies, support, someone to knock sense into the town council, you let me know." "Why would you do that?" "Because this town needs a teacher who isn't afraid of the job. And you strike me as someone who doesn't scare easy." Meilin studied her. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Wait till you've survived a full month." Margaret turned to leave, then stopped. "One more thing. Be careful around Gideon Vale." Meilin's blood went cold. "What?" "Gideon Vale. Banker. He owns half the mortgages in this county, including Wyatt's. He's been sniffing around town lately, asking questions." "About what?" "About you." The room seemed to tilt. Meilin gripped the edge of the desk to steady herself. "What kind of questions?" "Where you came from, who you are, why you're here." Margaret's expression darkened. "I don't know what history you have with him, and I'm not asking, but I know a wolf when I see one, and that man is dangerous." "I know." "Then you know to stay away from him." Meilin forced herself to breathe. "Does Wyatt know he's here?" "Not yet, but he will. Word travels fast in Black Hollow." After Margaret left, Meilin locked the schoolhouse and walked back to the ranch in a daze. Her mind was racing, trying to piece together what it meant that Gideon was here. Had he followed her? Had he known where she was going? Or was this just terrible luck? When she reached the house, Wyatt was in the front yard splitting wood. He looked up when he saw her, and his expression shifted immediately. "What's wrong?" "Gideon Vale is in town." The axe froze mid-swing. "What?" "Margaret Coulter told me. He's been asking about me." Wyatt set the axe down carefully. "You're sure it's him?" She described him. Rich banker, owns mortgages. How many men like that are there? Just one. Wyatt's jaw tightened. When did she hear this? Today. Maybe yesterday. I don't know. Has he come to the school? Not yet. He will. Meilin wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the coat. Why is he here? I don't know, but we need to find out. Wyatt picked up the axe and drove it into the stump, leaving it there. Come inside. We need to talk to Grace. Inside, Grace was at the table, working on arithmetic problems Meilin had assigned. She looked up when they came in, saw their faces, and set down her pencil. What happened? Trouble, Wyatt said. The kind that needs honesty. You old enough for that? I'm always old enough. Wyatt almost smiled. Fair enough. He sat down across from her. There's a man named Gideon Vale. He hurt Meilin back in Boston. Now he's here, and we need to be smart about it. Grace looked at Meilin. Hurt how? He tricked me, Meilin said quietly. Trapped me. I got away, but barely. Is he going to try again? I don't know. Grace's expression hardened in a way that made her look older than 10. Then we don't let him. It's not that simple, Wyatt said. Why not? Because he's rich and connected, and we're not. If he wants to make trouble, he can. So we make trouble back. Grace, I'm serious, Pa. If he's bad, we don't just let him win. Wyatt looked at his daughter for a long moment, then at Meilin. She's got a point. This isn't your fight, Meilin said. You're living in my house. That makes it my fight. I can leave. You could, but you won't. Meilin stared at him. You don't know that. Yeah, I do. You're not a runner. You're a fighter, and you're not done fighting yet. The words hit her like a punch. She wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, that she'd run halfway across the country and would do it again if she had to. But the truth was, he was right. She was tired of running, tired of being afraid, tired of letting men like Gideon decide what happened to her. What do you suggest? She asked. We find out what he wants, why he's here, then we decide what to do about it. And if he comes after me? Then he comes through me first. Grace nodded. And me. Meilin looked at them both, this rancher and his daughter who barely knew her, who had no reason to stand beside her except that they'd decided to, and felt something crack open inside her chest. Thank you, she said. Don't thank us yet, Wyatt said. This might get ugly. It already is ugly. Fair point. That night, Meilin lay awake in her small room, staring at the ceiling and listening to the wind rattle the windows. She thought about Gideon, about his hands and his voice and the cold certainty in his eyes when he'd locked the door. She thought about the women Margaret had mentioned in passing, the ones who'd come before her, the ones who'd drowned or fallen or disappeared. He'd done this before. She was sure of it now, and if he was here, it meant he wasn't done. Meilin got out of bed, pulled on her coat, and walked to the kitchen. Wyatt was there, sitting at the table in the dark, a glass of whiskey in front of him. Couldn't sleep either? He said. No. Want some? He gestured to the bottle. No. She sat down across from him, pulling the coat tighter. Margaret said something else today, about other women. Wyatt looked at her. What about them? She didn't say much, just that there had been others, women who didn't make it. You think Vale had something to do with it? I think men like him don't stop at one. Wyatt took a slow drink. If that's true, we need proof. How do we get it? Carefully. Meilin leaned forward. I need to know what happened to them, their names, how they died. If there's a pattern. That's dangerous. I don't care. You should. Why? Because he might come after me again? He's already here. The danger's already real. Wyatt set the glass down. You want to go to war with a banker who owns half this town? I want to stop him from doing this to someone else. That's not your responsibility. Maybe not, but it's the right thing to do. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the wind and the creak of the house settling. All right, Wyatt said finally. We'll look into it. But we do it smart. No running off half-cocked, no confrontations. We gather information, build a case, and if we find something, we take it to someone who can actually do something about it. Who? The sheriff, maybe, Or a federal marshal if it's bad enough. Meilin nodded. Agreed. Good. He stood picking up the glass. Now get some sleep. You've got a classroom full of demons waiting for you tomorrow. She almost smiled. They're not that bad. Give them time. The next day at school, Meilin couldn't focus. She went through the motions, reading lessons, arithmetic drills, geography, but her mind was elsewhere. Every time the door opened, she tensed, half expecting to see Gideon standing there with that cold smile. He never came, but someone else did. At lunchtime, a boy appeared in the doorway, not one of her students. Older, maybe 16, with a scarred lip and nervous eyes. Miss Zhao? He said. Yes? Can I talk to you? About what? He glanced around, making sure the other students were outside. About Gideon Vale. Meilin's heart kicked hard against her ribs. Come in. The boy stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He wouldn't meet her eyes. What's your name? Meilin asked. Elijah. Elijah Morse. What do you know about Gideon Vale? Elijah swallowed hard. I saw something a long time ago. Something bad. What did you see? I was fishing down by the ravine near the old Vale property. I saw him with a woman. His wife, I think. They were arguing. Meilin's pulse was pounding now. What happened? He pushed her. Pushed her how? Elijah's hands were shaking. Over the edge, into the ravine. I heard her scream, and then nothing. The room seemed to shrink around them. Did you tell anyone? Meilin asked. I tried. I told my pa, but he didn't believe me. Said I was making it up for attention. Then Vale came to our house and offered my pa money to keep quiet. Pa took it. How old were you? 10. Meilin felt sick. And the wife? They said she fell. Accident. Nobody questioned it. But you know different. I know what I saw. Meilin stood slowly, trying to keep her hand steady. Why are you telling me this now? Because I heard he's back, and I heard he's been asking about you. Elijah finally looked at her. I don't know what you did to him, but if he's looking for you, you need to know what kind of man he is. I already know. Then you know you're not safe. I know. Elijah backed toward the door. Be careful, Miss Zhao. He doesn't leave witnesses. Neither do I. The boy left, and Meilin stood alone in the empty schoolhouse, her mind racing. She had a witness, someone who'd seen Gideon kill. It wasn't enough to convict him, not after all these years, not with a story from a child, but it was a start. She needed more. That night she told Wyatt everything. He listened without interrupting, his expression getting darker with every word. The boy's credible? He asked when she finished. I think so. Then we need to find the others, the women who died. See if there's a pattern. How? Records. Death certificates, newspaper archives. Someone in this town knows something. Margaret might. Then we start with her. They rode into town the next morning, leaving Grace with a neighbor. Margaret Coulter lived in a neat house on the north side of town, with lace curtains and a garden that was buried under snow. She answered the door in an apron, flower on her hands. Wyatt, Miss Zhao, this is a surprise. We need to talk, Wyatt said, about Gideon Vale. Margaret's expression shifted. Come in. Inside, the house smelled like bread and cinnamon. Margaret poured them coffee and sat down across from them at a small table. What do you want to know? She asked. Everything, Meilin said. Every woman who died suspiciously. Every accident that wasn't. Everything. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood, walked to a drawer, and pulled out a small notebook. She set it on the table. I've been keeping track, she said quietly, for years. Meilin opened the notebook. Inside were names, dates, circumstances. At least 8 women over the past 12 years. Drownings, falls, a house fire. One woman who supposedly died of pneumonia, but the timing was suspicious. Why didn't you go to the sheriff? Wyatt asked. I did. He told me I was imagining things, that grief makes people see patterns where there aren't any. And you believed him? No, but I couldn't prove anything. Still can't. Meilin ran her finger down the list. These women, did they have anything in common? Young, attractive, alone. Most of them were new to town or passing through. Margaret looked at Meilin. Like you. He targets vulnerability. Always has. Wyatt leaned forward. If we could prove even one of these wasn't an accident, it wouldn't matter, Margaret interrupted. He owns the sheriff. Hell, he owns half the town council. You'd need federal intervention to touch him. Then we get it. How? Meilin closed the notebook carefully. We find proof he can't buy his way out of. Ma. The proof came from the place Meilin least expected, a locked drawer in a dead woman's house. Margaret had given them the address 3 days after their first conversation, scrawled on a piece of paper with shaking hands. Sarah Vale's old place. Nobody's lived there since she died. Town council keeps saying they'll sell it, but they never do. I think Gideon wants it to rot. The house sat on the eastern edge of town, half hidden behind overgrown brush and trees that had grown wild without anyone to trim them. Paint peeled from the siding in long strips, and one of the shutters hung crooked, banging against the wall whenever the wind picked up. It looked haunted, but not by ghosts. By neglect. Wyatt stood next to Meilin on the frozen path, studying the building. Breaking in is illegal, I know. If we get caught, the sheriff won't look the other way. I know that too. He glanced at her. You're still going in. Yes. Then I'm coming with you. They'd left Grace with Margaret, who'd promised to keep her busy with baking and gossip. The girl had protested, but Wyatt had been firm. This wasn't something a child needed to see. The front door was locked, but the back window had a broken latch. Wyatt jimmied it open with his knife, and they climbed inside, boots landing on dusty floorboards that creaked under their weight. Inside, the air was stale and cold, smelling like mildew and something sweet that had gone rotten. Furniture sat covered in sheets, ghosts of a life that had ended too soon. Meilin walked through the front room slowly, taking in the details. A piano in the corner, keys yellowed with age. Photographs on the mantel, faces too faded to make out clearly. A rocking chair positioned near the window as if someone had sat there watching the road. What are we looking for? Wyatt asked quietly. Anything he didn't want found. They split up. Wyatt took the upstairs, and Meilin moved through the ground floor, opening drawers and cupboards, sifting through the debris of someone else's life. Most of it was ordinary. Linens, dishes, books with cracked spines. Nothing incriminating, nothing useful. Then she found the study. It was a small room off the kitchen, barely big enough for a desk and a chair. The desk was old, scarred wood with brass handles, and when Meilin tried the drawers, 3 of them opened easily. The 4th didn't budge. Locked. She called for Wyatt, and he came down the stairs 2 at a time, knife already in hand. He worked the lock for a minute, swearing under his breath until something clicked and the drawer slid open. Inside was a journal. Meilin lifted it out carefully, her hands trembling. The cover was leather, worn smooth from handling, and the pages were filled with tight, careful handwriting. She opened it to a random page and started reading. April 14th, 1881. Gideon returned from Denver today with another shipment. He says it's mining equipment, but I saw the crates. Those aren't tools. I don't know what they are, but they're heavy, and the men who delivered them looked like soldiers, not workers. I tried to ask him about it, but he told me to mind my own affairs. I'm his wife. Aren't his affairs mine too? Meilin flipped ahead, scanning the entries. More shipments, more questions. Then the tone shifted. June 3rd, 1881. I found the bills of sale today. Hidden in his office, locked in the safe I wasn't supposed to know about. Rifles. Hundreds of them. He's selling guns to someone, and he's using the bank to hide the money. I don't understand why he'd risk this. We have enough. We've always had enough. But it's never enough for him, is it? Wyatt leaned over her shoulder, reading along. She knew. She knew, and she wrote it all down. Meilin kept flipping. The entries grew more frantic, more frightened. Sarah had started documenting everything, dates, names, amounts. She'd even copied shipping manifests and tucked them between the pages. And then, near the end, the handwriting changed, became rushed, desperate. September 12th, 1881. He knows I've been watching. He came home drunk tonight and tore apart my study looking for something. I hid the journal under the floorboards, but I don't know how long that will keep it safe. I don't know how long I'll be safe. I tried to talk to Sheriff Morris, but he wouldn't listen. He works for Gideon. They all do. If something happens to me, I need someone to know the truth. I need someone to... The entry ended there, unfinished. Meilin turned the page, but it was blank. She flipped through the rest of the journal. All blank. When did she die? Wyatt asked. Margaret said September 1881. Fell into the ravine behind the house. 2 weeks after this entry. He killed her. We don't have proof of that. We have this. Meilin held up the journal. We have her words. We have the manifests. It's not enough for murder. Maybe not. But it's enough for conspiracy, illegal arms dealing, federal crimes. Wyatt took the journal from her, flipping through it carefully. If we take this to a marshal, we will. Gideon will know it came from here. He'll know someone broke in. Let him know. I'm done hiding. They searched the rest of the house, but there was nothing else. Just the journal and the ghosts of a woman who'd tried to do the right thing and paid for it with her life. On the way out, Meilin stopped in the front room and looked at the photographs on the mantel. One of them showed a young woman with dark hair and serious eyes, standing next to a man who could only be Gideon. He was younger in the photo, but the cold arrogance was already there, etched into every line of his face. Sarah Vale had been pretty, young, alone in a marriage to a man who saw her as property, just like all the others. Meilin took the photograph and slipped it into her coat pocket. Then she and Wyatt climbed back out the window and walked away from the house without looking back. That night, Meilin sat at Wyatt's kitchen table and copied every page of the journal by hand. Her fingers cramped, her eyes burned, but she didn't stop. She needed a backup in case something happened to the original. She needed proof that couldn't be destroyed. Wyatt sat across from her, cleaning his rifle in slow, methodical movements. Grace had gone to bed hours ago, but neither of them could sleep. What happens when Gideon finds out? He asked. He'll come after me. That's what I thought. You can still walk away from this. Take Grace and go visit family for a while. Wait until it's over. Wyatt looked up from the rifle. You think I'd do that? I think you should. Well, I won't. Wyatt, you're not doing this alone. I already told you that. Meilin set down the pen, her hand aching. Why? You don't owe me anything. Maybe not. But I owe it to every woman who died because people like me looked the other way. He set the rifle down. And I owe it to Clara. Your wife? She always said the worst thing a person could do was see wrong and do nothing. I did nothing for too long. I'm not doing it anymore. Meilin stared at him across the table, this quiet rancher who'd taken her in without question and stood beside her when he had every reason not to. She wanted to tell him he was a fool, that this fight would cost him everything, but the words wouldn't come. Thank you, she said instead. Don't thank me yet. We still have to survive this. 3 days later, they rode into town to find the sheriff. Margaret had agreed to come with them, carrying the notebook she'd kept for years. Elijah Morse was there too, pale and nervous but determined. The sheriff's office was a small brick building next to the saloon, with barred windows and a smell that suggested the jail cells in back hadn't been cleaned in months. Sheriff Morris sat behind a scarred desk, boots propped up, reading a newspaper that was 2 weeks old. He looked up when they entered, and his expression shifted from bored to annoyed. Wyatt, Margaret, what's this about? Wyatt set the journal on the desk. We need to talk about Gideon Vale. Morris's boots hit the floor. What about him? He's been killing women for years. We have proof. The sheriff stared at the journal like it was a snake. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. You got evidence? Meilin stepped forward. This is Sarah Vale's journal. She documented everything, the gun running, the illegal deals, the threats, and we have a witness who saw him murder her. Morris looked at Elijah. That true, boy? Elijah nodded, throat working. I saw him push her into the ravine. I was 10 years old, but I know what I saw. 10 years old, Morris repeated. And you're just now coming forward? I tried. My father took money to keep quiet. Convenient. It's the truth. Morris leaned back in his chair, studying them all with cold eyes. Let me tell you how this looks to me. You've got a journal from a dead woman, a kid with a story that's over a decade old, and a vendetta against one of the most important men in this county. It's not a vendetta, Meilin said. It's justice. Same thing, depending on who you ask. Are you going to help us or not? Morris picked up the journal, flipped through a few pages, then tossed it back on the desk. This doesn't prove murder. It proves conspiracy, illegal arms dealing. That's federal. Maybe, but it's also old, and without corroborating evidence, it's just words on paper. Then find the evidence, Wyatt said. Search his property. Talk to the men he did business with. On what grounds? On the grounds that 8 women are dead, and he's connected to all of them. Morris stood slowly. You want me to investigate Gideon Vale, a man who owns half the mortgages in this town, including yours, Wyatt, based on a journal and a kid's memory? Yes. Then you're crazier than I thought. So you won't help. I didn't say that. Morris walked to the window, looking out at the street. I said it's complicated. Vale's got friends. Powerful ones. If I go after him without solid evidence, it won't just cost me my job. It'll cost me everything. And if you don't? Meilin asked. How many more women have to die before it's worth the risk? Morris turned to look at her. You're the one from Boston. The bride. I was never his bride. He seems to think different. Been asking about you all over town. I know. You scared? Terrified. But I'm doing this anyway. Morris studied her for a long moment, then sighed. All right. I'll talk to a federal marshal I know, see if he's interested. But I'm not making any promises. That's all we're asking. No, it's not. You're asking me to put my neck on the line for something that might not even stick. We're asking you to do your job. Morris's expression hardened. Get out of my office. Sheriff, I said get out. I'll look into it. That's the best you're getting. They left, the journal still on Morris's desk, and walked out into the cold afternoon air. Meilin felt like she had been punched in the stomach. He's not going to do anything, she said. Maybe not, Wyatt agreed, but we had to try. So what now? Now we go over his head. Margaret pulled her shawl tighter. There's a federal marshal in Cheyenne, name's Carson. He's got a reputation for going after corruption. How far is Cheyenne? 3 days by train. Meilin looked at Wyatt. I'll go. Not alone, you won't. I can handle this. I know you can, but you're not doing it alone. They made arrangements to leave the next morning. Margaret agreed to watch Grace, and Wyatt packed enough supplies for a week, just in case. Meilin spent the evening preparing lessons for her students, writing out assignments they could work on while she was gone. Grace sat at the table, watching her. You're really going after him? Yes. What if he comes here while you're gone? Then you and Margaret stay inside and don't open the door for anyone. I'm not scared of him. You should be. Are you? Meilin set down the pen. Every second of every day. Then why are you doing this? Because fear isn't a good enough reason to stop. Grace nodded slowly. Ma used to say that too. She sounds like she was smart. She was. Pa says you remind him of her. Meilin looked up, surprised. He said that? Not in words, but I can tell. Before Meilin could respond, the front door opened and Wyatt came in, stamping snow off his boots. He took one look at them and frowned. What? Nothing, Grace said quickly. Just talking. About what? Girl stuff. Wyatt looked suspicious but didn't push. Train leaves at 8. We should get some sleep. That night, Meilin lay awake again, staring at the ceiling and running through everything that could go wrong. The marshal might not believe them. Gideon might find out and run. The evidence might not be enough. Or worse, it might be enough. And Gideon would decide she needed to disappear before she could testify. She must have eventually fallen asleep, because the next thing she knew, Wyatt was knocking on her door, telling her it was time to go. They rode into town in the gray pre-dawn light, the wagon rattling over frozen ground. The train station was nearly empty, just a clerk half asleep behind the ticket counter, and a few men waiting on the platform. Wyatt bought 2 tickets to Cheyenne, and they settled onto a bench to wait. Meilin clutched the copied journal pages inside her coat, feeling the weight of them like a stone. You all right? Wyatt asked. No. Honest, I like that. The train pulled in with a screech of brakes and a blast of steam. They boarded and found seats near the back, away from the other passengers. As the train lurched forward, Meilin watched Black Hollow disappear behind them, swallowed by snow and distance. "No going back now," Wyatt said. There never was. The journey to Cheyenne took 2 days, not 3. They traveled in silence mostly, both of them too tense to make conversation. Meilin read through the journal copies again and again, memorizing every detail, every date, every name. She needed to know this backward and forward, needed to be unshakable when the time came. Wyatt spent most of the trip staring out the window, lost in thoughts he didn't share. Once Meilin caught him looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. When their eyes met, he looked away. "What?" she asked. "Nothing. You're a terrible liar." "Yeah, well," he shifted in his seat. "I was just thinking you're braver than most men I know." "I'm not brave. I'm angry." "Same thing sometimes." Cheyenne was bigger than Black Hollow, louder, dirtier. Buildings crowded together along muddy streets, and the air smelled like coal smoke and horses. They found a boarding house near the federal office and rented 2 rooms, though Meilin suspected Wyatt wouldn't sleep much either. The next morning, they walked to the marshal's office, a squat brick building with a flag hanging limp in the still air. Inside, a deputy sat at a desk, shuffling papers with the enthusiasm of a man who'd rather be anywhere else. "Help you?" he asked without looking up. "We need to see Marshal Carson," Wyatt said. "He's busy. It's urgent." "Everything's urgent?" The deputy finally looked up, took in Meilin's face, and his expression shifted slightly. "What's this about?" "Murder, conspiracy, illegal arms dealing." That got his attention. He stood, disappeared into a back room, and returned a minute later. "He'll see you." Marshal Carson was a lean man in his 50s, with gray hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and believed too little. He gestured for them to sit, then leaned back in his chair and waited. Wyatt started talking. He laid out everything: the dead women, the journal, Elijah's testimony, the pattern of deaths that stretched back over a decade. Meilin filled in the gaps, adding details about Gideon's methods, his connections, the way he used fear and money to keep people silent. Carson listened without interrupting. When they finished, he was quiet for a long time. "You know what you're asking me to do?" he said finally. "Yes," Meilin said. "You're asking me to go after a man with money and power based on a dead woman's diary and a witness who was a child at the time. The diary has evidence of federal crimes. Maybe. Or maybe it's the paranoid ramblings of an unhappy wife. You think she made it up? I think people see what they want to see." Meilin leaned forward. "I saw him trap me, beat me, lock me in a room, and tell me I belong to him. That's not paranoia, that's experience." Carson's expression softened slightly. "I believe you, but belief isn't proof." "Then what is?" "Corroboration, physical evidence, living witnesses who can testify in court. We have Elijah, a man recounting something he saw as a child 15 years ago. Defense will tear him apart. So you won't help." "I didn't say that." Carson opened a drawer and pulled out a file. "I've been hearing rumors about Gideon Vale for years. Nothing concrete, but enough to make me curious. If what you're saying is true, and I can prove it, I'll bring him down. But I need more than what you've given me." "What do you need?" "I need the guns, or proof they existed. Shipping records, buyers, anything that puts him in the middle of an illegal operation." "The journal has names." "Then I'll start there." Carson stood. "Give me 2 weeks. I'll investigate quietly. If I find enough to move forward, I'll come to Black Hollow myself and make the arrest. And if you don't, then you go home and hope he doesn't come after you before I do." It wasn't the answer Meilin wanted, but it was better than nothing. She handed over the copied journal pages, and Carson promised to keep them safe. On the train ride back, Wyatt was quiet again. Meilin stared out the window, watching the landscape blur past, and tried not to think about what would happen if Carson failed. If Gideon walked free. If she'd risked everything for nothing. "We did the right thing," Wyatt said suddenly. "You don't know that." "Yeah, I do. Even if it doesn't work, we tried. That counts for something." "Does it?" "Yeah, it does." They arrived back in Black Hollow late on the 3rd day. Margaret met them at the station, Grace at her side, and the relief on both their faces was immediate. Thank the stars, Margaret said. We were starting to worry. Everything all right here? Wyatt asked. Quiet. Too quiet, if I'm honest. Gideon? No sign of him, but I've been asking around and nobody's seen him in town for days. Meilin felt ice slide down her spine. Where is he? Nobody knows. They rode back to the ranch in tense silence. When they arrived, Wyatt made them all stay in the wagon while he checked the house. He came back a few minutes later, jaw tight. Someone's been inside. Meilin climbed down. How do you know? Things moved. Drawers opened. Little stuff, but enough. He was looking for something. Probably the journal. He won't find it. We took it with us. He'll figure that out. Grace looked between them. What do we do? We stay alert, Wyatt said. Lock the doors. Don't go anywhere alone. That night, Meilin couldn't sleep at all. She lay in bed with her coat on and her boots laced, listening to every creak and groan of the house settling. Around midnight, she heard footsteps outside her door. She sat up, heart pounding. A soft knock. Meilin? Wyatt's voice. She opened the door. He stood there in the dark, rifle in hand. Thought I heard something, he said quietly. I didn't hear anything. Probably nothing then. But he didn't leave. He stood there, and she stood there, and the silence stretched between them. You should get some sleep, she said finally. So should you. I can't. Yeah, me neither. He turned to go, then stopped. Listen, whatever happens, you need to know you're not facing this alone. I know. Good. He hesitated, then added, and if he shows up here, he's not getting past me. Wyatt, I mean it. Then he was gone, footsteps fading down the hall. Meilin closed the door and leaned against it, her chest tight. She'd spent so long running, so long trying to survive on her own, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone stand beside her. It was terrifying, and it was the only thing keeping her sane. The next morning, she went back to teaching. The students were restless after her absence, full of questions she couldn't answer, but she pushed through. She taught them fractions and geography and the proper way to diagram a sentence. She corrected their grammar and praised their progress and pretended everything was normal. But it wasn't normal. Because that afternoon, when the last student left, Gideon Vale walked through the schoolhouse door. Meilin's blood turned to ice. She was alone. No Wyatt, no witnesses. Just her and the man who'd tried to destroy her. He looked the same, expensive suit, cold eyes, that smile that never reached above his teeth. Hello, Meilin, he said. She didn't move. Get out. Now, is that any way to greet your husband? You're not my husband. Legally, perhaps not, but we both know what happened in Boston. Everyone knows what happened in Boston. I told them. His smile faltered. Did you now? Every detail, the forged letters, the fake ceremony, the locked room. And they believed you? Enough of them. Gideon stepped further into the room, closing the door behind him. You've been busy, talking to marshals, digging through my dead wife's things. She kept good records. She was a paranoid woman with too much time on her hands. She was a woman who knew you were a murderer. His expression went cold. Careful, Meilin. Accusations like that can be dangerous. So can evidence. He moved closer, and Meilin forced herself to hold her ground. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she'd learned the hard way that running only made predators chase faster. You think you're clever, Gideon said softly. You think you've outmaneuvered me, but you're still just a frightened little girl playing at being brave. And you're a coward who preys on women because you can't face anyone who might fight back. His hand shot out, grabbing her arm hard enough to bruise. You should have died in that snow. But I didn't. I can fix that. The door slammed open. Wyatt stood there, rifle leveled at Gideon's chest. Let her go. Gideon's hand tightened for a moment, then released. He stepped back, raising his hands in mock surrender. Easy, Boone. We're just talking. Get out of my town. Your town? I own half of it. Not the part with a gun pointed at you. Gideon looked between them, his expression calculating. Then he smiled again, cold and sharp. This isn't over, he said to Meilin. Yes, she said. It is. He walked past Wyatt and out into the fading light. They listened to his footsteps fade. Then Wyatt lowered the rifle. You all right? No, but I'm still breathing. That's enough for now. Meilin looked at him, this rancher who kept showing up exactly when she needed him, and felt something shift in her chest. Not gratitude, something deeper, something that scared her almost as much as Gideon did. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me yet. He'll be back. I know. Then we'll be ready. That night, they sat at the kitchen table and waited for the world to end. It didn't. But the silence felt like a clock ticking down to something neither of them could stop. Marshal Carson arrived in Black Hollow on a Thursday morning, 2 weeks to the day after Meilin and Wyatt had left his office. He came alone, riding a dark horse and wearing a duster coat that had seen better days. Word spread through town within the hour. Meilin was in the middle of a history lesson when Margaret appeared in the schoolhouse doorway, breathless. He's here, she said. The marshal. Meilin set down the chalk. Children, read pages 12 through 15. I'll be back shortly. Thomas raised his hand. Can we go outside instead? No. But read. She followed Margaret into the cold afternoon air, pulling her coat tight. They walked quickly toward the sheriff's office, where a small crowd had already gathered. People stood on the boardwalk, whispering to each other, casting nervous glances at the marshal's horse tied to the post. Inside, Carson sat across from Sheriff Morris, a stack of papers spread between them. Morris looked like he'd swallowed something sour. Miss Zhao, Carson said, standing when she entered. Good timing. You found something? I found a lot of things. He gestured to the papers. Shipping manifests. Bills of sale. Correspondence between Vail and a gun manufacturer in Pennsylvania. Your friend Sarah was thorough. Meilin's heart was pounding. Is it enough? For conspiracy and illegal arms dealing, yes. For murder? He paused. That's harder. But I've got testimony from 3 men who worked for Vail. They're willing to testify about the shipments in exchange for immunity. What about the women? Carson's expression darkened. I spoke to the coroner who examined 2 of the bodies. He said at the time he had suspicions but was pressured to rule them accidents. He's willing to reopen the cases. Sheriff Morris shifted in his chair. You're really doing this? I am. Vail's going to come after you. He's got friends in high places. So do I. And mine actually care about the law. Morris stood, his face red. This is going to tear this town apart. Then it needed tearing, Carson said flatly. Where's Vail now? His house, probably, or the bank. Let's start with the house. They walked through town in a procession. Carson, Morris, 2 deputies, Wyatt, and Meilin. People stopped what they were doing to watch. Some looked relieved. Others looked angry. A few looked scared. Gideon's house sat on a hill overlooking the town, a sprawling Victorian monstrosity with too many windows and a fence that cost more than most people's homes. Carson rode up to the gate and dismounted, handing the reins to one of the deputies. Wait here, he told Meilin. No. This isn't safe. I don't care. Carson studied her for a moment, then nodded. Stay behind me. They walked up the path together, boots crunching on gravel. The front door opened before they reached it, and Gideon stood there, dressed like he was expecting company. His expression was calm, almost amused. Marshal Carson, he said, to what do I owe the pleasure? Gideon Vail, you're under arrest for conspiracy, illegal arms dealing, and suspicion of murder. Gideon's smile didn't waver. On what evidence? On evidence provided by your late wife and corroborated by multiple witnesses. Sarah's journal. Gideon's eyes flicked to Meilin. I should have known you'd go digging. You should have stopped killing women, Meilin said. Alleged killing. Innocent until proven guilty, remember? Carson stepped forward. You can come peacefully, or I can drag you. Your choice. For a moment, Gideon looked like he might refuse. Then he sighed, held out his wrists, and let Carson cuff him. My lawyers will have me out by morning, he said. Maybe, but you'll still have to stand trial. They led him down the path, past the crowd that had gathered at the gate. Someone spat at him. Someone else threw a rock that missed by inches. Gideon walked through it all with his head high, that cold smile still fixed in place. Meilin watched him go, feeling something loosen in her chest. Not relief, Not yet, but something close. Wyatt appeared beside her. You all right? Ask me after the trial. The trial was set for 3 weeks later in Cheyenne, where a federal judge could oversee it. Those 3 weeks felt like 3 years. Gideon's lawyers filed motion after motion, trying to get the case dismissed, trying to suppress evidence, trying everything they could to keep their client out of prison. Carson stayed in Black Hollow, working with Meilin and the other witnesses to prepare their testimony. He was thorough, patient, and brutally honest about their chances. The arms-dealing charges will stick, he said one evening at Wyatt's kitchen table. We've got paper trails, witnesses, physical evidence. The conspiracy charge is solid too. But not murder, Meilin said. Murder's hard to prove without a body and a clear cause of death. We've got suspicious circumstances, a witness who was a child at the time, and a dead woman's journal. Defense will argue it's all circumstantial. So he might walk. On the murder charges? Possibly, but he's still looking at 20 years minimum for the federal crimes. It wasn't enough. Meilin wanted him buried, not just imprisoned, but she'd learned to take what she could get. The day before they were supposed to leave for Cheyenne, Elijah Morse showed up at the ranch, pale and shaking. They came to my house, he said, barely able to get the words out. Vale's men said if I testified, my family would pay for it. Wyatt sat him down, poured him water. Did they hurt you? No, just scared me. You tell the marshal? Not yet. I came here first. Carson arrived within the hour, jaw tight with anger. They're trying to intimidate witnesses, standard playbook for men like Vale. Will Elijah be safe? Meilin asked. I'll put a deputy on his house, and I'll make sure the judge knows about the threats. But Elijah was shaking his head. I can't do this. I'm sorry, but I can't put my family at risk. If you don't testify, Carson said gently, he wins, and he'll do this to someone else. I know, but I can't. He left, and the room fell silent. We still have the journal, Wyatt said. The shipping records. The other witnesses. It's not the same, Meilin said. Elijah was the only one who saw him kill. Then we make the other charges count. They traveled to Cheyenne the next day. Meilin, Wyatt, Carson, and Margaret, who insisted on coming as moral support. Grace stayed with a neighbor, though she'd begged to come too. The city felt colder than Meilin remembered, grayer, like even the buildings knew something dark was about to happen. The courthouse was a massive stone building with columns and stairs that seemed designed to make people feel small. Inside, the air smelled like old wood and fear. They found seats in the gallery and waited. Gideon arrived in chains, flanked by 2 guards and his lawyer, a sharp-faced man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd never lost a case in his life. Gideon saw Meilin and smiled. She didn't smile back. The trial lasted 4 days. The prosecution laid out the evidence methodically. Shipping manifests showing illegal gun sales, testimony from men who'd worked for Gideon, financial records that proved he'd used the bank to launder money. They presented Sarah's journal, reading excerpts aloud while Gideon sat stone-faced at the defense table. Then they called Meilin to the stand. She walked up slowly, heart hammering, and swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor was a thin woman with kind eyes and a voice that could cut glass. Miss Zhao, please tell the court how you came to know the defendant. Meilin took a breath. He intercepted correspondence between myself and Wyatt Boone. He forged letters promising marriage and a fresh start. When I arrived in Boston, he trapped me. Trapped you how? He staged a fake wedding ceremony, took me to a locked room, told me I belonged to him. Did he assault you? Yes. How did you escape? I jumped out a window, 3 stories down. Then I ran. The courtroom was silent. What injuries did you sustain? Broken ribs, lacerations, bruising. I still have scars. And after you escaped, where did you go? I found a freight train heading west. I didn't know where it would take me. I just knew I had to get as far from him as possible. The defense lawyer stood. Objection. This is irrelevant to the charges of arms dealing and conspiracy. It establishes a pattern of behavior, the prosecutor said. The defendant has a history of targeting vulnerable women. Objection stands. The defendant is not on trial for assault. The judge considered. Sustained. Move on, counselor. The prosecutor nodded. Miss Zhao, when you arrived in Black Hollow, did you believe you were safe from the defendant? Yes. Until I learned he owned the mortgages in the county. Until he started asking about me. And when you found Sarah Vale's journal, what did you do? I copied every page. I knew it was evidence. I knew he'd try to destroy it if he found it. Why did you care? You could have just left town. Meilin looked directly at Gideon. Because I knew I wasn't the first, and I wouldn't be the last unless someone stopped him. The defense lawyer cross-examined her for over an hour, trying to poke holes in her story, suggesting she'd fabricated the assault, implying she was after Gideon's money. Meilin answered every question calmly, precisely, giving him nothing to work with. When she finally stepped down, her hands were shaking, but she'd held the line. Wyatt testified next, describing how Meilin had arrived at his ranch half dead and terrified. Margaret testified about the pattern of deaths. The coroner testified about his suspicions. The men who'd worked for Gideon testified about the guns. Then the defense put Gideon on the stand. He denied everything, said Sarah had been paranoid, that the journal was fiction, that the guns were a legitimate business venture he'd invested in years ago. He claimed Meilin was a scorned woman seeking revenge for a relationship that hadn't worked out. I cared for her, he said, voice smooth as oil. I tried to help her, but she was unstable, prone to wild accusations. Meilin's hands curled into fists. The prosecutor tore into him on cross-examination, pointing out inconsistencies, highlighting the documented evidence that contradicted his claims. But Gideon never broke. He sat there calm and collected, playing the role of the wrongly accused gentleman. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Meilin barely slept, barely ate. Wyatt stayed close, not saying much, just present. On the second evening, as they sat in the boarding house, he finally spoke. Whatever happens, you did everything you could. It might not be enough. It's still more than anyone else did. The verdict came down on a cold morning in late November. They filed back into the courtroom and took their seats. The jury foreman stood, a piece of paper trembling in his hands. On the charge of conspiracy to commit illegal arms dealing, we find the defendant guilty. Meilin's breath caught. On the charge of illegal arms dealing, we find the defendant guilty. Gideon's face remained impassive. On the charge of murder and the death of Sarah Vale, we find the defendant not guilty due to insufficient evidence. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order. Meilin sat frozen, trying to process it. Guilty on 2 counts, not guilty on the one that mattered most. Sentencing was set for the following week. Gideon would remain in custody until then. As they let him out, he looked at Meilin one last time. His smile was gone. In its place was something cold and hateful. This isn't over, he said quietly. Yes, it is, she said back, but she wasn't sure she believed it. Sentencing came 7 days later. The judge gave Gideon 25 years for the arms dealing charges to be served in a federal prison in Colorado. No parole, no early release. It was over. Meilin stood outside the courthouse afterward, breathing in the cold air, trying to make herself believe it. Wyatt stood beside her, hands in his pockets. You did it, he said. We did it. How do you feel? Empty. That'll pass. Will it? Yeah, eventually. They traveled back to Black Hollow the next day. The town looked different somehow, smaller and less threatening. Or maybe she was just different, harder, older, something. When they reached the ranch, Grace ran out to meet them, throwing her arms around Meilin hard enough to knock the breath out of her. You're back, the girl said. I'm back. For good? Meilin looked at Wyatt over Grace's head. He was watching her with that steady gray gaze, waiting. For good, she said. That night she stood in the small room that had become hers and stared at her reflection in the window glass. The woman looking back was thinner than she'd been, harder, with lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. But she was still standing, still breathing, still here. There was a knock at the door. Wyatt. Can I come in? Yes? He stepped inside but didn't sit. I wanted to talk to you about something. All right. The ranch, it's still drowning in debt. Gideon held the mortgage, and now that he's in prison, the bank's going to want payment. Meilin's stomach dropped. How much? More than I have. More than I can make before they foreclose. When? 3 months, maybe 4 if I'm lucky. She sat down on the bed, trying to think. There has to be something we can do. There is. But it's not just about me. Half the town's in the same boat. Gideon owned their mortgages too. The bank's calling them all in. Why? Because they can. Because without Gideon running it, they want a clean house and start fresh. Meilin stood. Then we stop them. How? I don't know yet, but we figure it out. Wyatt looked at her for a long moment. You know you don't have to do this. You've already done more than anyone could ask. I know, but this is my home now. These are my people. I'm not letting them lose everything because of a man who's already lost. He almost smiled. You're something else, you know that? So I've been told. That night, Meilin sat at the kitchen table with paper and pen, working through numbers and possibilities. Margaret stopped by with more information about who owed what. They made lists, calculated totals, looked for patterns. The debt was staggering. Collectively, the town owed over $50,000, more than they could raise in a year, let alone 3 months. It's impossible, Margaret said. Nothing's impossible, Meilin said. Just difficult. You have a plan? The beginning of one. The plan took shape over the next week. Meilin proposed a cooperative, a way for the town to pool resources, buy out the mortgages collectively, and own the debt themselves instead of the bank. They'd pay it back over time, to each other, with fair terms and no threats. It was radical, probably illegal in some technical way, but it might work. She called a town meeting to present it. The church was packed. Every family that owed money showed up, along with plenty who didn't but wanted to see what would happen. Meilin stood at the front, notes in hand, trying not to let them see how nervous she was. Most of you know me by now, she started. Some of you like me, some of you don't. That's fine. I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to save this town. Someone in the back muttered something about foreigners. Yes, I'm Chinese, Meilin said. And yes, I'm a woman. And yes, I'm new here. But I'm also the person standing in front of you with a plan to keep you from losing your homes. So you can either listen or you can leave. No one left. She explained the cooperative slowly and clearly, answering questions as they came. People were skeptical, worried it was too risky, too complicated, too strange. But as the night wore on, the skepticism started to shift into something else. Hope. How much would each family need to contribute? Someone asked. It depends on how much you owe, but we'd work it out fairly. No one pays more than they can afford. And if someone can't pay, then the rest of us cover it. That's what a cooperative means. We carry each other. A man in the front row stood. What if the bank won't sell to us? Then we make them an offer they can't refuse. Cash up front, no haggling, clean transaction. Banks like clean transactions. Where do we get the cash? From everyone in this room, crops, livestock, land, labor. Everything has value. We just have to count it. The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was close. Enough people believed it could work that they were willing to try. Over the next 2 months, the town came together in a way Meilin had never seen. People brought what they could: money, goods, promises of work. Thomas's father donated 3 horses. The blonde sister's family contributed half their harvest. Margaret organized bake sales and auctions. Even the people who'd been hostile to Meilin at first started to soften when they saw what she was building. Wyatt worked alongside her, crunching numbers, organizing meetings, keeping people focused. Grace helped too, running messages and keeping track of who'd contributed what. By early spring, they had enough. Barely. But enough. Meilin and Wyatt rode to Cheyenne one last time, carrying a satchel full of cash and promissory notes. The bank manager looked at them like they were insane. You want to buy out all of Vale's mortgages, he said flatly. Yes. That's over $50,000. We have it. He counted it twice, then a third time, like he couldn't believe it was real. When he finally looked up, he was shaking his head. I've never seen anything like this. Is it enough? Meilin asked. It's enough. They signed the papers, transferred the titles, and walked out of the bank as the new holders of Black Hollow's future. On the ride back, Wyatt was quiet for a long time. Then he said, You saved us. We saved us. You led. There's a difference. Meilin looked out at the landscape rolling past, the snow starting to melt, the first hints of green pushing through. I didn't come here to lead. I came here to survive. And now? Now I want to live. When they reached Black Hollow, the town was waiting. Someone had strung up a banner that said, "Welcome home." People cheered when Meilin and Wyatt stepped off the wagon. Margaret hugged her so hard her ribs ached. Grace appeared with a bouquet of wildflowers that were half frozen but still beautiful. That night there was a celebration at the church. People brought food and music and stories. Meilin stood in the corner, watching it all, still not quite believing it was real. Wyatt found her there. "You should be out there. This is your victory." "It's everyone's." "But you made it happen." She looked at him. "I couldn't have done it alone." "No, but you could have run. You didn't." There was something in his eyes she couldn't quite read, something that made her breath catch. "Wyatt, I know this isn't the time," he said, "and I know you've been through hell. But I need you to know that having you here, watching you fight for this town, for my family, it changed something." "Changed what?" "Me. I thought after Clara died that was it, that I was done feeling anything for anyone. But you proved me wrong." Meilin's heart was pounding. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know." He turned to leave, but she caught his arm. "Wait." He stopped. "I feel it too," she said quietly. "I didn't want to. I tried not to, but I do." "What are we going to do about it?" "I don't know. Can we figure it out slowly?" "As slow as you need." They stood there for a moment, not quite touching, not quite apart. Then Grace appeared, tugging on Wyatt's sleeve. "Pa, they're asking for you to say something." He smiled. "Coming." As he walked away, Meilin felt something settle inside her. Not peace exactly, but something close. The fight wasn't over. There would always be another fight. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, she wasn't facing it alone. And that made all the difference. Spring came to Black Hollow like a promise the town wasn't sure it deserved. Snow melted into mud, then into green grass that pushed through the hard ground with a stubbornness Meilin recognized. She watched it from the schoolhouse window during afternoon lessons, half listening to Thomas stumble through a reading passage while her mind wandered to the cooperative's next meeting. The mortgage payments due in June, the way Wyatt had looked at her last night across the dinner table when he thought she wasn't watching. Life had become complicated in ways she hadn't anticipated. Good complicated mostly, but still. "Miss Zhao?" She turned. The blonde sisters, Anna and Elizabeth, were standing at her desk, hands folded, wearing matching expressions of determination. "Yes?" "We finished the assignment. All of it. Can we go outside now?" Meilin checked the clock. Still 20 minutes left, but the sun was out for the first time in days, and keeping children inside on a day like this felt cruel. "Yes, but stay where I can see you." They bolted before she could change her mind, and soon the whole class was spilling out into the yard, shouting and chasing each other like the winter had been holding them prisoner. Meilin stood in the doorway and watched them, feeling something warm settle in her chest. This was hers. The school, the students, the noise. She'd built it from broken desks and suspicion, and now it was solid, real. Margaret appeared on the road, walking with purpose. She waved when she saw Meilin. "Got a minute?" "Always." They sat on the schoolhouse steps, watching the children play. Margaret pulled out a ledger from her bag and opened it to a page covered in numbers. "The cooperative's doing better than expected," she said. "We're ahead on payments. If we keep this pace, we'll have the whole debt cleared in 3 years instead of 5. "That's good news." "It is, but there's something else." Margaret's expression shifted. "I got a letter from a lawyer in Denver. He's representing Gideon's estate." Meilin's stomach tightened. "What does he want?" Apparently Gideon had assets we didn't know about. Property in Colorado, investments in mining operations. The lawyer says we're entitled to restitution for what he did. Restitution. Money, a lot of it. Enough to pay off the entire cooperative debt, and then some. Meilin stared at her. Why would they offer that? Because Gideon's in prison and the lawyer wants to settle quietly. Avoid scandal. Avoid more trials. What's the catch? We have to sign papers saying we won't pursue further legal action. No wrongful death suits, no appeals, Nothing. They want to buy our silence. Essentially, yes. Meilin looked out at the children playing, their voices carrying on the wind. How much are we talking about? $75,000. The number was staggering. More than enough to free the town completely, to rebuild, to start fresh without the shadow of Gideon's debt hanging over them. What do you think? Margaret asked. I think it's blood money. It is, but it's also practical. I know. They sat in silence for a while. Then Margaret said, I'm bringing it to the cooperative meeting tonight. Let everyone decide together. That's fair. Will you speak? If I have to. That night, the church was full again. People filed in slowly, talking in low voices, wondering what the emergency meeting was about. When Margaret stood and explained the offer, the room went quiet. Then it erupted. Some people wanted to take the money immediately. Others refused to touch anything connected to Gideon. Arguments broke out, voices rising, old tensions surfacing. Meilin sat in the back and watched, waiting. Finally, someone shouted, What does Miss Zhao think? All eyes turned to her. She stood slowly. I think we have to decide what kind of people we want to be. What's that supposed to mean? A man called out. It means this money comes from pain, from the women Gideon destroyed, from the lives he ruined. If we take it, we're saying that pain has a price, that it can be bought and sold. But it could save us, a woman said. My family's barely scraping by. This money would change everything. I know, and maybe that's enough. Maybe survival is more important than principle. Meilin paused. But I also think we've proven we can save ourselves without his money. We did it once. We can do it again. That's easy for you to say, someone muttered. You don't have children to feed. You're right. I don't. So maybe my opinion shouldn't carry as much weight. She looked around the room. But I'll tell you what I do have. I have scars from a man who thought he could own me. I have nightmares about a room I barely escaped from. And I have a choice about whether to let him keep hurting me even from prison. The room was quiet now. If we take this money, Meilin continued, he wins. Not completely, but enough. He gets to buy forgiveness he doesn't deserve. And we have to live with knowing we let him. She sat down. The silence stretched. Then Wyatt stood. I vote we refuse the money. Margaret raised her hand. Same. One by one, others joined them. Not everyone, but enough. When the vote was counted, the decision was clear. Black Hollow would refuse the settlement. They'd pay their own debts on their own terms, without Gideon's shadow anywhere near it. Walking back to the ranch afterward, Meilin felt lighter than she had in months. Wyatt walked beside her, Grace between them, all three of them quiet under the stars. You did good tonight, Wyatt said. I just told the truth. That's what makes it good. Grace tugged on Meilin's sleeve. Miss Zhao. Yes? Are you going to stay with us forever? The question hung in the air. Meilin looked at Wyatt, who was suddenly very interested in the road ahead. I don't know about forever, Meilin said carefully, but I'm not planning to leave. Good, because I like having you here. I like being here, Grace smiled, satisfied, and ran ahead to chase something only she could see in the darkness. Wyatt cleared his throat. She's not the only one, he said quietly. I know. Do you? Meilin stopped walking. Wyatt, I need you to understand something. I'm broken in ways I don't know how to fix yet. I wake up some nights thinking I'm back in that room. I flinch when people touch me without warning. I'm not whole. Nobody is. You know what I mean. He turned to face her. I know exactly what you mean, and I'm telling you it doesn't matter, not to me. It should. Well, it doesn't. He took a breath. Clara died 3 years ago, and I loved her more than I thought it was possible to love another person. When she was gone, I figured that was it, that I'd had my chance at happiness, and it was over. Wyatt, let me finish. Then you showed up, half frozen and bleeding, and you were the most stubborn, difficult, complicated person I'd ever met. You didn't ask for help, didn't ask for pity, just fought your way through every single day like it was a war. And somewhere in all that fighting, I started to feel something I thought I'd lost. What? Hope. Meilin felt her throat tighten. I don't know if I can be what you need. I don't need you to be anything except yourself. That might not be enough. It's more than enough. Grace called from up ahead, impatient. They started walking again, slower this time, hands not quite touching but close. Can we try? Wyatt asked. Just try and see what happens. Meilin thought about it. About the ranch and the school and the town that had become home despite everything. About the man beside her who'd never asked her to be anyone other than who she was. Yes, she said, we can try. The summer brought work, hard, relentless, back-breaking work. The cooperative needed constant attention. Payments had to be collected, disputes settled, plans adjusted. Meilin found herself spending as much time on cooperative business as teaching, which meant her evenings were consumed by ledgers and letters. But there were good moments, too. Grace's birthday in July, celebrated with a cake that only half collapsed and presents wrapped in newspaper. A town dance in August where Wyatt asked Meilin to dance, and she said yes even though she barely knew the steps. Quiet nights on the porch, after Grace went to bed, talking about nothing and everything until the stars came out. It wasn't perfect. Meilin still had nightmares. Still froze sometimes when a door closed too loudly, or someone moved too quickly in her peripheral vision. Wyatt learned to warn her before touching her shoulder, learned to give her space when she needed it, learned that some wounds took longer to heal than others. And slowly, carefully, something grew between them that felt like trust. In September, a letter arrived from Marshal Carson. Gideon had been transferred to a prison in Colorado, maximum security, no chance of parole. The letter included a note from the warden confirming that Gideon Vale was no longer a threat to anyone. Meilin read it twice, then burned it in the stove. You all right? Wyatt asked. Yeah, I just needed to see it gone. Understandable. She watched the paper curl and blacken, turning to ash. I spent so long being afraid of him. Even after the trial, even after the sentencing, part of me kept waiting for him to show up, to finish what he started. And now? Now I think I can finally stop looking over my shoulder. That night, she slept without nightmares for the first time in over a year. October brought the first real test of the cooperative. A drought had damaged several farms, and 3 families couldn't make their payments. The cooperative met to decide what to do. Some wanted to grant extensions. Others worried that would set a precedent. Arguments erupted again, old divisions resurfacing. Meilin stood and waited for quiet. The whole point of this cooperative, she said, was to carry each other. That means when someone falls, we help them up. We grant the extensions, we cover the shortfall collectively, and we trust that when we fall, they'll do the same for us. What if they can't pay back? Then we adjust. Make the terms longer, accept payment in goods or labor instead of cash. We're not a bank. We don't have to act like one. The vote passed. The extensions were granted, and the 3 families who'd been struggling worked twice as hard the following season to make up the difference. By the time winter came around again, Black Hollow had changed. Not overnight, not dramatically, but steadily, like the slow thaw of spring. People looked out for each other more, helped each other more. The town that had once been ruled by fear and Gideon's influence was becoming something different, something better. Christmas Eve arrived cold and clear. The church held a service that Meilin attended mostly for Grace's sake, sitting in the back and trying not to think too hard about the hymns that still made her uncomfortable. Afterward, people lingered, talking and laughing, and someone produced a fiddle and started playing. Grace dragged Meilin and Wyatt out to dance, and for a few minutes, everything else faded. There was just the music and the movement and the warmth of people who'd become family without anyone quite noticing when it happened. Later, walking back to the ranch under a sky full of stars, Grace ran ahead again, leaving Meilin and Wyatt alone. I've been thinking, Wyatt said. Dangerous. He smiled. I've been thinking that we've been doing this dance for months now. Trying without really trying. Being together without saying we're together. I know. And I'm wondering if maybe we should stop pretending it's temporary. Meilin's heart kicked. What are you asking? I'm asking if you'd consider marrying me. For real this time. Not out of desperation or fear, or because you have nowhere else to go, just because you want to. She stopped walking. Wyatt, I know it's fast. I know you're still healing, but I also know that I don't want to spend another day without you being part of this family officially. Grace needs you. I need you. And I think maybe you need us too. Meilin looked at him, this steady, quiet man who'd saved her life, by simply treating her like a person worth saving. I'm still broken. So am I. I still have nightmares. I know. I don't know if I'll ever be the wife you deserve. I don't want the wife I deserve. I want you. She felt tears prick her eyes. Yes. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. For real this time. He pulled her close, carefully, giving her time to pull away if she needed to. She didn't. She leaned into him and let herself feel safe. They were married in March, on the first warm day of spring, in the church where Meilin had once stood and told a room full of strangers that she wouldn't let Gideon win. Margaret stood as witness. Grace held the flowers and cried happy tears she tried to hide. Half the town showed up, filling the pews and spilling out into the yard. The ceremony was simple. No fake reverend this time, no locked rooms, no fear. Just two people choosing each other in front of everyone who mattered. When it was over, they walked back to the ranch as a family. Wyatt, Meilin, and Grace. The house looked the same as it had the day Meilin first arrived, half frozen and desperate. But everything was different now. That night after Grace had gone to bed, Meilin and Wyatt sat on the porch and watched the stars. You happy? He asked. Yeah, I think I am. You think? I'm still getting used to it. Happy isn't something I've had a lot of practice with. Then we'll practice together. She leaned against him. I never thought I'd get here. When I was on that train, bleeding and broken, I didn't think I'd survive the week, let alone build a life. But you did. We did. Yeah, we did. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes when two people don't need to fill every moment with words. Can I tell you something? Meilin said. Always. When I jumped out that window in Boston, I thought I was choosing death. I thought freezing to death would be better than what Gideon had planned. But somewhere between that window and this porch, I chose life instead. And it was the hardest, scariest, best decision I ever made. Wyatt took her hand. I'm glad you chose life. So am I. The months that followed weren't perfect. Nothing ever is. There were hard days when the nightmares came back, when Meilin couldn't get out of bed, when the weight of everything that had happened felt too heavy to carry. There were days when the cooperative struggled, when payments came up short, when people argued and threatened to quit. But there were more good days than bad. Days when Grace came home from school bursting with stories. Days when the cooperative met and solved problems instead of creating them. Days when Meilin looked around at the life she'd built and couldn't quite believe it was real. By the time autumn came around again, the cooperative had paid off a third of its debt. The town held a celebration, complete with food and music and speeches that went on too long. Meilin stood at the back, watching, until Margaret pulled her to the front. Speech, she demanded. I don't do speeches. You do now. Meilin looked out at the crowd, people who'd once looked at her with suspicion and fear, who now looked at her with something that might have been respect, or at least acceptance. I'm not good at this, she started, but I'll try. A year and a half ago, I came to this town with nothing, no money, no family, no future. I was running from a man who wanted to destroy me, and I thought Black Hollow would just be another place to hide. She paused, gathering her thoughts. But you didn't let me hide. You made me fight. You made me stand up. And in return, I tried to give you something worth fighting for. We built this cooperative together because we had to, because the alternative was losing everything. But what I've learned, she continued, is that we didn't just build a cooperative, we built community. We proved that people who have nothing can still have each other. That fear doesn't have to win. That men like Gideon Vale can take everything except our ability to choose who we want to be. She looked at Wyatt, standing in the crowd with Grace on his shoulders. I chose to be here, to be part of this. And I'd make that choice again every single day. The applause was loud and genuine, and Meilin felt something shift inside her, a final piece falling into place. That night, lying in bed next to Wyatt, she thought about the woman who'd stepped off that train in a blood-stained wedding dress. That woman had been terrified, broken, barely holding on. She wasn't that woman anymore. She was someone who'd taken fear and turned it into action, who'd taken pain and turned it into purpose, who'd survived not by running or hiding, but by standing her ground and refusing to break. You awake? Wyatt whispered. Yeah. What are you thinking about? How far I've come. We've come. We've come, she agreed. He pulled her closer. Where do you think we'll be a year from now? I don't know, but I'm not afraid to find out anymore. Good. They fell asleep like that, tangled together, safe in the house they'd made into a home. The years that followed brought their own challenges and victories. The cooperative eventually paid off all its debts and became a model that other towns started to copy. Grace grew into a fierce, brilliant young woman who went to college in Denver and came back to teach at the same schoolhouse where Meilin had first proved herself. The ranch thrived under Wyatt's steady hand and Meilin's sharp management, and Meilin herself changed in ways she couldn't have predicted. The nightmares faded but never fully disappeared. The scars remained, both visible and invisible, but she learned to carry them without letting them define her. She learned that survival wasn't the same as living, that choosing to be vulnerable was sometimes braver than choosing to be strong, that the opposite of fear wasn't courage, it was love. On a fall afternoon 20 years after she first arrived in Black Hollow, Meilin stood in front of her classroom and watched a new generation of students stumble through their reading lessons. They were loud and difficult and absolutely perfect. After school, she walked home through the town that had become hers. People waved from their porches. Children called her name. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. Wyatt was waiting on their porch, gray now, but still steady, still solid. Grace was visiting with her own daughter, a tiny, fierce thing who'd inherited her grandmother's stubbornness. Long day? Wyatt asked as Meilin climbed the steps. Good day? Those are the best kind. She sat beside him, and they watched the sun disappear behind the mountains. Do you ever think about how it all started? She asked. Sometimes. Do you regret it? Not for a second. He looked at her. You? Meilin thought about the train, the blood, the cold, about Gideon and the locked room and the window that had saved her life, about every choice she'd made between then and now. No, she said. I don't regret any of it, because it brought me here. To Wyoming? To home. And that was the truth. Not a perfect truth, not a simple one, but true nonetheless. She'd come to Black Hollow broken and desperate, looking for survival. What she'd found instead was something she'd stopped believing existed, a place where being broken wasn't the end of the story, where scars could heal without disappearing, where the woman who'd barely escaped death could build a life worth living. The woman in the blood-stained wedding dress was gone. In her place was someone stronger, stranger, more complicated. Someone who'd learned that justice wasn't always clean, that healing wasn't linear, that the best revenge wasn't destruction but survival, not just enduring but thriving. Someone who'd learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose to stay when everything in you screams to run. Meilin Zhao had made that choice, and it had made all the difference. The stars came out one by one, the same stars that had watched her arrive all those years ago. But now they were looking down at a different woman, a whole woman, a woman who'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to her and refused to let it be the last thing. You ready to go inside? Wyatt asked. In a minute. I just want to sit here a little longer. Take all the time you need. So she did. She sat and breathed and felt the weight of everything she'd survived, everything she'd built, everything she'd become. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, that weight felt like wings instead of chains.